Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Jen's Books. I hope you're having a fantastic week and you're reading something really excellent at the moment. This video is my second catch-up for March. I'll put the link in the description for the first catch-up if you haven't seen that. So I've been reading some fantastic books in the last sort of week to 10 days and I'm really looking forward to sharing them with you. I've been really fortunate in a way because I've been travelling all over the shop, so I've had the opportunity on planes, trains and automobiles to catch up with my reading, and I've got some really fantastic recommendations for you to include in this video. So I hope that you enjoy it, and if you're new to the channel, do remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on any more recommendations and updates from my 100 book for the year challenge, which, as I say, gonna completely smash. But that's just fantastic. It just means I have to move the number up for next time. So the first book I wanted to show you is The Exhibitionist by Charlotte Mendelson. If you caught my little short video a couple of weeks ago when I was up in Edinburgh, you'll see that this was a book that I took with me during that journey when I went to a conference. The reason I picked up this book is that I thought it was based in Edinburgh. It actually isn't based in Edinburgh, but one of the central characters, who is Jess, the youngest daughter of the family, in the heart of the story, they are based in Edinburgh. They live in Edinburgh. They're a teacher, and at the beginning of the book she catches a train from Waverley Station, which is quite nice because that's where I took my little video that I shared a couple of weeks ago. So when I started reading this book, I immediately drew comparisons with Erin Kelly's The Skeleton Key, which came out last year. That was a thriller, so it had different dimensions to this book. This is more about the interactions with the family and the sort of toxic relationships that they have with one another. But both books have art at the centre and egos and artistic egos and quite toxic relationships that are driving wedges between family members. In this particular book we have Ray, who is or was an artist. He had some modest success in the past and had a reputation for being an artist and being successful, but in the following years very little has been produced. He's sort of stymied in his artwork, and the difficulty with Ray is his ego is gigantic and he's incredibly controlling, and he makes all of his family's lives pretty much a misery. We have his long suffering wife Lucia, who's actually also an artist, and we find out pretty early on that she's the one with the talent, but she's continually suppressing this and hiding this to save Ray's ego. I really didn't like Ray. You might pick up on this. And then they have 3 children as well, who are all suffering from this toxic relationship with their father, and the way that his wife Lucia has always sort of tried to smooth things over to make life quieter for herself. So we have Leah, who's the eldest child. She's the daughter who has stayed at home and is, you know, Ray's biggest supporter. She absolutely idolises him. And then we have Patrick, who is the son who's struggling. He really wants to be a chef, but can't bring up the courage to tell his father this because his father accuses him of being selfish and making it about himself, when he just wants him to stay where he is as kind of his assistant and working in local gardens, which are great, but not what Patrick wants to do. And then we have Jess, who's one of the central characters who we read the story through the eyes of. It's a series of third-person narrations, and it drifts between them all. We get through the eyes of Lucia, we get through the eyes of Jess, and we get bits through the eyes of Patrick as well, and Jess's fiance Martin. So what did I like about the book? I really like the complications of the characters. As I say, I like the use of the art as the sort of central focus. I like books about art, so that was really interesting. But I did struggle a bit with it in that it felt quite slow to start, and then but it really sort of, the tension really ratchets up towards the end, and it's kind of an ambiguous ending, but I enjoyed it. It was an enjoyable book. It's not one that I'd probably pick up and read again, but in terms of family dynamics, if you like books about family dynamics, then it's one you'll probably enjoy. But I did find Ray overwhelmingly toxic and quite difficult to read. The second book I wanted to mention was Flowers for the Sea by Zin E, Rocklyn. And as I've mentioned previously, I'm trying to read quite a few dystopian books at the moment. So this is one of the ones I've picked up that I've seen in a recommended as a modern dystopian gothic novel. It's really tiny, as you can see. It's only about 100 words long, and the story is really about a central character who is called Iraxi, and she is caught on a boat. The whole of her kingdom that she comes from is flooded, and so they're all refugees basically floating from one place to another. And inside the boat, she is again ostracized for being other, for being different from the other people on board. She actually turned down a prince in her homeland, and as such she's sort of seen as having been, you know, almost a cause of some of the events that have taken place since. And in this world, very few women are carrying babies to full term and are having healthy pregnancies. And Iraxi finds herself pregnant, and she has carried the baby much further along than anybody else has in their community. What I really liked about this book, the ending, I found the ending really sort of fantastical and empowering, and I really like the ending. But what I found more difficult was the tone of the writing generally. It feels very melodramatic. It doesn't help because it's through the eyes, for the first person point of view of Iraxi, so there's no sort of escape really from her feelings and her experiences. I think a lot of readers would probably really enjoy it, but for me, I found the voice quite cumbersome and challenging to read and not entirely enjoyable. But as I say, I expect a lot of readers, particularly those who read more fantasy than I do, would probably really enjoy this. But it was worth reading for the end alone, and incredibly short, as I say. So, you know, if that sounds like it's your kind of thing, don't let me put you off reading it. Following on from Drowned Kingdoms, the next book I read was J.G. Ballard, The Drowned World. So this one is a bit more of a classic. It's from 1962. J.G. Ballard, incredibly well-known author. I think I've mentioned in the haul for this that I read Empire of the Sun, that I really, really loved, which is kind of his memoir. But this is a dystopian fantasy novel that's based in a future world that feels really present. Actually, the ice caps have melted, the Central Europe is all underwater, the land masses have shifted, and humanity are having to live up in the Antarctic. But groups of scientists are travelling down south towards the equator to do scientific studies and to dive and find you know, remnants of this civilization that was before them. So the idea really is that the world is kind of is this kind of sense of devolution. Things are going backwards, back to a new Triassic period. And the question that's being asked is, are humans devolving alongside this? So the main character is called Kerens, and he is Dr. Robert Kerens, and the story is told through a first-person narration. So again, we get a close-up view on him, and there's lots of sort of scientific detail which helps give the story authenticity. And the idea really is, when the scientists decide they've got to return back to Antarctica, there are lots of red flags, and there are concerns because many of the staff who are with them are having these strange dreams. They're all dreaming the same dreams. Kerens and a couple of other individuals decide to stay back in the drowned world to see whether they can survive. So I did really enjoy this. There's lots to enjoy about it. If you like a sort of classic dystopian kind of a novel, you'll probably enjoy this. If you like J.G. Ballard, you'll enjoy it. Warning, there are some kind of outdated descriptions that could be triggering or upsetting. There are some descriptions of black people that I found quite troubling to read in there. So I mean, it's a product of its time, and there's much to enjoy about it, but it's just something to be aware of if you've not read books from this period before. But generally, it's an interesting book that made me think a lot about these issues about how our bodies house the history of the generations and ancestors have come before us. So from that point of view, definitely an interesting read. And if you're interested in dystopian novels, it's one that's sort of seen as a bit of a classic. Next, we have a library book, and this is one that I didn't talk about in my recent haul because I only picked it up last week. I got Lucy by the Sea by Elizabeth Strout, but I've not read that yet because I found My Name is Lucy Barton, which is the first book in the series, so I thought I have to read this first. And I didn't know a whole lot about it. I think I have read books by her before. I think I read Olive Kitteridge at some point, but this is the book that sort of really starts the Lucy Barton franchise. And it was written in 2016 or published in 2016. It's based in New York, and our character Lucy has been very ill. She went in for an appendectomy and caught an infection and has been incredibly poorly. So the action takes place from her hospital room in New York, and her mother, who she hasn't seen for many years, suddenly appears one day, and they start talking about Lucy's childhood, about their pasts, and the sorts of experience that they have shared, and also, you know, sort of their opinions that are different. And the relationship between the mother and daughter is core here, and it's a problematic relationship, but there's also a lot of love there, and there's a lot about what's not said in this book. I really enjoyed it for that relationship between the mother and daughter, and despite the fact that there have clearly been you know, issues, they grow up with no money, and there is some tension around the you know, the deprivation that was around the childhood. But at the core of it, it's this sort of connection between these two generations of women, and I really, really enjoyed it. And because of that, I'm definitely going to start reading the others. My understanding is you don't really need to read them in sequence. They all work as standalone novels. So the next one I'm going to read is Lucy by the Sea, because I already have that from the library. And one of Elizabeth Strout's books was shortlisted for the Booker last year as well. So she's incredibly well thought of writer. She's got an endorsement by Hilary Mantel on the front, so if you've got an endorsement by Hilary Mantel, that's always a good sign. But would really recommend it. It's only a quick read, but if you like books that explore relationships in families in a really thought-provoking and emotional way, it worked really, really well for me. Next, we have a book that I've had for some time, and I've been really looking forward to reading, but kind of putting it off because it has had so much hype, and I was worried that I was going to read this book and it wasn't going to live up to what I'd heard about it, and that's Night Crawling by Leila Mottley. This is a fantastic book. Yes, it lives up to the hype. I'll say that straight away. It was released in 2022. It's about a character called Kiara Johnson who sort of finds herself she's living in Oakland in the States, and she finds herself adrift. Her father died in prison. Her mother is in between how she's been incarcerated as well, and there's this awful family tragedy that ties them all together. And she lives with her brother in this apartment complex, and eventually her brother, they have a kind of separation as well, so she ends up by herself. But she's not really by herself, because next door there's a young boy who is has no one to look after. His name's Trevor, and his mother is absent. His mother is an addict, and she's sort of in and out of his life and leaves him there. And he's only, you know, a small child, really, 8 or 9. And so Kiara takes on the role of bringing Trevor up and keeping him safe and giving him security and making sure he doesn't leave his house, lose his house, and that he doesn't go hungry. And she also has a really good friend called Ale as well, who is there to support them. But it's a book about desperation and sacrifices, and the sacrifices that Kiara have to take, which includes starting to work on the streets to earn money to support her and this little boy who sort of becomes more and more part of her life. And it's a book about racism, it's a book about prejudice, it's a book about sexism, it's about love. It's emotionally jolting. It's one of those books that you read and at the end you say, it's not me crying, it's you, it's you. It's definitely one that is going to, you know, really, you really feel it in your heart. And I think that a lot of readers would enjoy this book. It, as I say, it deals with powerful, big topics, but it isn't dealt with in a way that makes it difficult to read. It's really accessible, and you really root for this character and her relationships and the people around her as she gets drawn into this sort of seedy underlife and back out the other side. So definitely recommend this. If you've not read it, put it on your list for TBR if that sounds like it's topics that would interest you. But out of all the books I've read so far on the ones I'm talking about today, that's the one that really sort of had the most emotional impact, gave me all the feels in all the right places. So I recommend Night Crawling by Leila Mottley. Next, I was travelling at the weekend to Prague for work, and so I packed a book, as you might have seen from the short video I posted over the weekend, which shows a book called Austerlitz, which is a book that I picked up because it's based in Prague, and I like to, when I'm travelling, pick up a book that's sort of based or kind of influenced by the place I'm going to. However, and bear with me, I was going through Manchester Airport and I might have detoured to WH Smith's and picked up a couple of books, one of which is Becky, which is written by Sarah May. So this is a new book. This came out in 2023, and it's a rewriting of Vanity Fair. So how could I resist? How can I resist? It's a rewriting of Vanity Fair based in the 90s. So it felt like a bit of a no-brainer. I picked this one up, and another one which I'll talk about in my next haul video. And I read this one, I gobbled it up while I was away. And basically, it has the same name. It's Rebecca Sharp, who you may know is the name of the central character from Vanity Fair. It kind of follows on from my last email, really, of books that are influenced or rewritten versions of previous books. And it's very much that. But it's based on the phone hacking scandals of the tabloid newspapers, and we follow Becky as she works in journalism. She works her way up the ladder, and what I really liked about this book is they really caught Becky Sharp's character in that she does awful things. She does awful things, and she lies, and she's selfish, but you still root for her. And that is something I found in reading Vanity Fair, which I also recommend if you've never read it. She's a real anti-heroine. But yeah, it's a great book. Is it as good as Vanity Fair? Probably not. But I really enjoyed it. It kept me reading. I wanted to know about Rebecca and her relationships with George and Rawdon and George's wife, and her relationship with her mother, and you know, the school that she sort of almost went to when she was a child but manages to bring to its knees as the book goes on. So as I say, it's very much based on kind of the phone hacking scandals and scandals around tabloid presses in the 90s. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It's not my favourite book I've ever read, but I would definitely say if you're a fan of Vanity Fair, or you're a fan of those kind of sort of empowering women in the 90s books, I don't think that's a genre, but you might know what I mean. You know, you're likely to enjoy this, and I enjoyed it. It's scandalous, you know, it's a good read, and it was fun. I also wanted to mention that because this week has housed National Poetry Day for the UK, I wanted to mention a collection of poetry. It's actually a reread, but I felt should include some poetry in this particular video for March. So I wanted to introduce you to The Illustrated Woman by Helen Mort. Helen Mort is actually one of my favourite contemporary poets. She's also based in the north of England, and she writes a lot about nature. She writes about motherhood. She writes about feminism, but she's incredibly accessible. So if you don't read poetry because you think, oh, you know, it's written to puzzle and confuse us, I would recommend Helen Mort as a poet to pick up, because she's incredibly accessible, but she writes poetry with such punch, and about themes that you know, a lot of readers will really be able to engage with. There's really strong imagery, and as I say, she writes about running, she writes about motherhood, she writes quite a lot about tattoos, hence the title The Illustrated Women, and feminism and the landscape of the body. So if, as I say, you know, you enjoy reading poetry, or even if you don't, definitely recommend Helen Mort for a starting place as a poetry, and one that I really enjoyed. But happy National Poetry Day for a few days ago. last of all, as I say, I've been travelling a lot, so I don't have books to show you for the last two reads. Reads is a bit of a stretch. One of them was an audio book. But I did want to share it with you, particularly because one, I've just previously reviewed one of this author's previous books, and secondly because it's a book that's been longlisted for the Women's Fiction Prize 2023, and that is Cursed Bread by Sophie Macintosh. So you may remember I read the Water Cure, and I enjoyed it, but it didn't blow me away. But this book I really enjoyed. I got it as an audiobook so I could listen to it while I was out and about the last few weeks. And again, it's a 2023 book, so it's brand new out, and it's based on a real event as well, from my understanding, which was a village in France that got poisoned by bread in the 1950s. And in this telling of the story, it is told through the eyes of a character called Elodie, first person narration. So we get a real sense of intimacy with this narrator and a sense of trust, even though, you know, we think from the beginning, we're left unsure as to how reliable she is. But they live in this village in France. She's the wife of a baker. She's in quite an unfulfilling and disappointing marriage, and this two new characters appear in the village. He's American ambassador and his wife Violet, and the ambassador's only ever known as the ambassador. And so launches almost a kind of a love triangle of manipulation between these three characters, and Elodie's fantasy kind of takes over as the novel goes on, and she starts to be a bit detached from reality the more and more she gets pulled into this sort of relationship with Violet and her husband. It's about sex, it's about desire, it's about betrayal, but it's also full of loads of really specific and striking details, which I didn't find with the Water Cure, but that really brought this to life for me. It's sort of punctuated by these tragic and horrific images as it goes through, which I don't want to spoil for you. But we're left hanging throughout the whole of the novel, waiting to find out, what actually happened with this poisoning with the bread in the village. And it reminded me a little bit of, I mean, it is a bit of a stretch of Perfume. I don't know if you've read the book, but at the end of it, it all sort of goes a bit batshit crazy, for lack of a better terminology, excuse my language there. And there's a sense of that with this book as well. But I really enjoyed it, so much so that I'd quite like to buy a paper copy as well, so that I can reread it at my own pace and flick to and fro. You know, it's not quite the same with an audio version. It's good in a way because you have this voice of the character, but I do like to sort of go to and fro in the pages. But if you're looking to read some of the books on the Women's Prize long list, yeah, I would recommend it. I really enjoyed it. And last of all, I read on my Kindle another book that's been doing the rounds and had quite a lot of talk about it recently, which is Woman Eating by Claire Kodha, which came out last year. You may recognise the front of the book. It's sort of mostly yellow, and then there's like a nectarine, but the nectarine has veins in it. It's a really striking front cover, and it's a contemporary vampire story. It feels quite literary, and it's around the character of Lydia, who was turned by her mother when she was a baby, and it kind of turns the idea of the cliche vampire on its head, or it attempts to. And again, it's another book that's actually tied up with art and artworks and creating art. And that sort of side of things really interested me, as Lydia is an artist and she starts an internship in a gallery and gets drawn into that kind of a life and meets new people, but all the time sort of suffering with this carnal hunger, this hunger for blood that she's finding difficult to to find to feed herself. So there's lots I really enjoyed about it. It wasn't a particularly long book. I whizzed through it, and you know, I enjoyed it from the point of view of it being about vampires and it being about art, and the character of Lydia, it's the first person narration, and so we never really get very far from beyond her own feelings and her own dwellings and her point of view. And I suppose if I had a criticism of it, it would be that the external characters really interested me, but they weren't fully utilised. I would have liked to know more about them and their backstories and her relationship with them. And there was part of me that thinks this book is calling out for a sequel. It's calling out for more information. We want to know what happens next. It has quite an ambiguous open ending, and yeah, if there was a sequel, I would definitely sign up and buy it. So so some fantastic reads. I've some books I've really enjoyed, particularly Night Crawling. As I say, that's sort of the standout, and Cursed Bread as well, which I really enjoyed. If you're going to the bookshop and you're looking for it, it's a sort of bluish book, and it has this really striking image of a woman with flowers lying on the floor in front of her face. But yeah, I'd also really recommend that. But I think that's like another 7 or 8 books. I will do a proper stats catch up in my final video for March. But I hope that there are some books there that maybe interest you. I'd like to know if you've read them and what you thought of them, or any suggestions that maybe you might make based on those. And I'll see you on the other side. But as I say, if you're new to the channel, do like and subscribe. Do put comments in, you know, feel free to ask questions. Let me know what you think about some of these book choices. And I'll speak to you again soon. Take care. Bye.